Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm McKenna from Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I am excited to be hosting virtual events today for the store. So I'm going to be in conversation twice today. The first one, which is happening right now, is in conversation with Stuart Neville, who is one of my favorite authors, favorite people to chat with, and I think we're going to be in for a treat talking with him today. As always, if you want more information about the author or their new book, Stuart's new book is The House of Ashes, and we have signed book plates available for it. I've dropped a link in the comments. You can order books from us if you are so inclined. We would appreciate that. Also, if you have any questions, don't be shy. Put those in the comments on Facebook or the live chat on YouTube, and we'll get to them in a little bit. I'll be back on this afternoon or this evening with a couple other authors. And as always, we have a very packed virtual event schedule. So you can find out details on that at murderbooks.com. I also just updated all of our October virtual events on Facebook. So all of our Facebook events are current through the end of October. So I'm sure that there's someone on there that you're going to want to watch an interview with. But now let me get to the star of the show today, Stuart Neville. Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for being here. It's always a treat to talk with you. And I'm so jealous of your backdrop of all those fantastic guitars. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Let me get you introduced first formally, and then we'll start our talk. Stuart Neville, the King of Belfast Noir, is the author of the short story collection The Traveler, as well as 9 novels for which he's won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and been shortlisted for the Edgar, Macavity, Dilys, Barry, and Anthony Awards, as well as the CWA Steel Dagger. And he lives near Belfast. Is this actually your 10th book now, or is this number 9?
This is my 10th novel.
Yeah. Okay. So I knew as soon as I read it, I knew this bio was a book off. So 10th novel. And as I said, it's House of Ashes, and it is absolutely fabulous. You know, I've been a fan of yours since the very beginning, and I'm excited to talk with you about this book today. Why don't you tell us about this book in your own words?
Okay. Again, I'll do the obligatory show it to the camera.
Show it to the camera. Yes. I'm sorry. At one point when we started these virtual events, I would bring home a bag of prop books every night or like during the week, because I do these virtual events from home. And I have just in the past 18 months or so just gotten lazy with it. So I'm glad you have your prop book. I keep failing to bring books home with me. So my apologies, but you held it up. So that's good.
No, The House of Ashes, it's been a long time in the making. It's my first novel under my own name since 2016, which is kind of a scary thought. But the book opens with a woman called Sarah Keane, who we learn very quickly has been moved. She's an Englishwoman, has been moved to Northern Ireland with her husband after suffering a nervous breakdown, as described. And so he moves her back to close to his hometown in Northern Ireland, to this remote farmhouse that his father, who's a property developer, has bought and renovated for them. But within the first few days of being there, Sarah senses something that isn't right with the house. And one of the tells is that there's a red stain on the stone kitchen floor that no matter how often she cleans, it always comes back. So she doesn't feel quite comfortable there, and there's a sense of things just being not quite in balance. And then by the third or fourth morning after they've moved in, there's a frantic hammering on the front door at 6 a.m. So she goes to the door, and there's an elderly lady there screaming at her, why are you in my house? Why are you in my house? Get out of my house. Where are the children? And Sarah's husband, Damien, appears and whisks this lady away in his car to the care home that she's wandered away from. So this triggers Sarah to start looking into the history of the house, and she discovers that the lady who was hammering the door is called Mary Jackson, and that Mary was part of a tragedy that happened at the house 60 years ago. And the book then alternates between Sarah in the present day and going back 60 years to Mary's experience of being a prisoner in this house in the basement. And the more Sarah digs into it, and the more she befriends Mary, and they form this bond over the course of the book, the more she finds out about this house's history, and the more she realizes something is terribly wrong. And the story, as it progresses, then is really about the bond that develops between these two women, but also how their shared traumas. We learn that Sarah is in a course of control relationship with her husband, and it's this bond that she forms with Mary that triggers Sarah to finally stand up to her husband, and also gives Mary the courage to finally tell the truth about what happened in the house 60 years ago.
And it is wonderful, and I think a little scary, but in the best possible way.
It wouldn't be one of my books if it wasn't a bit scary.
It's true. It's true. So I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about the fact that you do a masterful job incorporating the supernatural in real life in your books. Do you think that just is pervasive because of the history of Irish storytelling?
I think to be honest, I think it's more to do with me being an 80s kid.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up reading in the 80s, and if you read in the 80s, you read Stephen King.
Yeah.
It was just the law, as it was at that time. And the first adult novel I ever read when I was 12, which is probably far too young, was The Shining.
Yeah.
Which made a huge impression on me. And I devoured the entire Stephen King catalogue and the other sort of 80s horror writers who were working at that time. And I didn't really come to crime fiction until I was a little bit older, into my 20s. And I kind of thought I'd left the sort of horror thing behind me when I sat down and started trying to write. But when I tried to write a thriller, horror elements kept creeping in. If I tried to write a horror novel, thriller elements kept creeping in. And I found that it was difficult to kind of separate the two. And I do feel there's always been a kind of a grey area between thriller and horror.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking stuff that's grounded in the real world, like Thomas Harris, there's certainly a horror element in there, even if it's not supernatural. But also John Connolly has explored that ground very extensively as well. So I think there's a good crossover in the readership as well between thriller readers and horror readers. We get a lot of the same things out of the genres. And I think it's just because every writer is a product of their reading. And because that's what I read, and that's what I was kind of steeped in. It's those elements will always come out really without me trying. But also, the one thing I did with my debut novel, The Ghost of Belfast, which I still thank you for supporting so much way back 12 years ago now. The supernatural element in that book, I always try to keep it ambiguous so that the reader could decide for themselves whether they were literally supernatural beings in the book or if this was some manifestation of the character's guilt. And likewise in The House of Ashes, it is somewhat ambiguous. You could read it as being just stresses of the mind that are bringing about these other worldly kind of occurrences, or it could be supernatural. I think one thing I found out with very early on being published is that readers will very often bring their own values to what they're reading. And when things are ambiguous like that, it still amuses me to this day that when Ghost of Belfast came out, I found that people would decide for themselves whether it was supernatural or psychological. And even though at the very end of the book it does tell you very explicitly what it is, you wouldn't budge readers anyway. Once they'd made up their mind, you wouldn't shift them from it. Yeah. So that was an early lesson for me, is that people will bring an awful lot of their own beliefs to what they read. So I think people could read the book on different levels. You could read it as a thriller novel. You could read it as a horror novel. I think that's really down to the reader to filter that through their own tastes and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, that's a totally valid point, because when I hand sell Ghost of Belfast, I describe, the character is haunted by these people from the past, but I say, you don't know if he's physically haunted or if it's like psychological, manifestation of that. And it's actually funny because I have my opinion on the book, but like my mother, who's a big fan of yours, like your books are ghost stories, like 100%. She says that this book is such a wonderful ghost story. So like, people do bring that to it. She wanted me to ask you, the fact that, because of course Ghosts of Belfast, in her opinion, is also a ghost story. She wanted me to ask you, she thinks it's unique that you write such characters who are ghosts that are, they're not evil entities. They are searching for something, some kind of resolution. And she was wondering if you could discuss that.
Yeah. When I have actually tried to write horror stories where that supernatural element is a threat.
Yeah.
And I find it often doesn't work for me. Those supernatural elements seem to work better as almost kind of Greek chorus. Sometimes I think they certainly work like that in the Ghosts of Belfast.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of, although they're there's something that they want. They're also there to observe. They seem to be there to observe more than anything else. And I think in House of Ashes it's something similar. We're talking about the children
Yeah.
and being coy about it. We realize there when Mary at the start asks about the children, where are the children? We know that she never had any children, but there are children in the house. And it's not that they're passive, but they're there kind of almost observing. Being part of the shadows of the house and the sort of the darker corners of the house. And they don't drive the story in themselves, but they're there as a presence and kind of a manifestation of the things that are wrong with the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even in the Traveller, the short story collection, there are a couple of stories in that are out and out ghost stories or horror stories. There's one called The Green Lady, where the premise is a woman who appears to children and sort of spirits them away. But even then, she's not threatening. She brings the children to play.
Yeah.
So I've not actually thought about that before. Your mother made me think about that. Yeah, I don't. They are ghost stories, but to some extent, but not in the sense that the ghosts are a malevolent presence.
Right. Yeah.
They're almost benign. They're there as observers or as signals of something else. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me that you said, just a little bit ago that you were so inspired by Stephen King in the 80s because he has some really malevolent ghost figures. So your books don't incorporate this, whether it's legitimate supernatural element or psychological element. They don't incorporate it for cheap scares. It's just that it's part of the story. And I think because even those ghostly characters are so well drawn and have their own, I guess, emotions, for lack of a better word, it really adds to the effectiveness of the book. It's not, they're not just there as scenery, So,
yeah. I mean, there's I don't imagine he'd be well known in the States. There's a Belfast poet called John Hewitt, or was active in the sort of 40s and 50s. And he wrote a play in verse called The Bloody Bray that was about a soldier who had taken part in a massacre in sort of the 1600s or 1700s, coming back to the site of the massacre and finding the ghosts of the victims there who were simply there to accuse him. And I hadn't read that before I wrote The Ghosts of Belfast, but I wound up using a quote from that in the epigraph at the front of the book. And the line is, "The place that lacks its ghosts is a barren place." And in a sense, the ghosts that appear in Ghosts of Belfast and House of Ashes, they're always of a place, if that makes sense. And they're there as kind of markers or sort of spiritual artifacts of what's gone on before, really.
Sure.
Rather than sort of ghosts come out and go, boo, it's not that. It's they're echoes of something, if that's not too pretentious.
No, it's not. It's not too pretentious. I think it's entirely accurate. Speaking of being of a place, I want to talk about this house where you driving along one day and you saw this house and you're like, oh, I need to set a book there? Like, is there a real life inspiration for this house and this setting?
Not a specific one, but it's the kind of house you always see tucked away. If you're driving down a sort of narrow country road, there'll always be a house just set back a little bit from the road. It might be derelict, it might be occupied, it might be a bit unkempt. There may be a little bit of a garden, but they'll be attached to farmland. There might be outbuildings and so on. There'll always be buildings like this dotted around. Really, wherever you go in Northern Ireland, it's kind of part of the landscape. Again, because it's until very recently, really, Northern Ireland's economy is largely agricultural, so there are all sorts of these little small farms. And we haven't had sort of industrial agriculture come in, so it's always been small family farmhouses and so on. And you might find several generations of a farming family will set up houses over their land. So there are always these little, quite small farmhouses everywhere. You just turn off any main road down a country lane, you'll pass a bunch of them, and they're always very quite plain and functional. There's never anything fancy about them. And they're everywhere. So yeah, it's inspired not by a particular house, but by a certain kind of house that you always see out in the countryside here.
Fair enough. So did you have to do any or much research for this book? And is there anything you came across that was a favorite kind of tidbit that you want to pass along?
Something that didn't appear in the book, but one of the things it happens a couple of times in the book, but one of the things I like in it is Mary lives in the basement of the house with the two women that she calls her mummies. There's Mummy Joy and Mummy Noreen. And very often they reminisce about the outside world and things that they did and places they went. And they talk about going to Portrush, which is a seaside town on the north coast of Northern Ireland. I don't know what a Texas equivalent would be, but maybe the equivalent of like Coney Island in New York. It's that kind of touristy kind of place where so working class people would have gone for holidays, would have stayed in a guest house for a week. I did quite a bit of research into the history of Portrush, the place I went as a child. One of my earliest memories. This is going off a bit of a tangent, but we could never afford to foreign holidays or to travel very far. But we a couple of times went to Portrush and we had a room in a guest house. I remember one year I was only about 4 or 5 years old. The IRA did a bomb blitz on the town while we were there, and I remember hiding under the bed where the bomb was going off in the streets around us. And the day after, walking with my mother on the street behind us, and remember the fire brigade hosing down a church that was burning. That's kind of a tangent, but yet looking back into the history of this town, that's played a big part in my life and for a lot of people in Northern Ireland. And the little dance halls that there used to be a big thing to have dances, and a band would play, and the kids would have lemonade, and dad would have a pint of beer, and mum might have a martini if she was feeling cheeky, But what really shocked me, there was I've forgotten the name of the venue now, it's going right in my head, but there's a place it's actually in Port Stuart rather than Portrush, but it's up in the same area, that had all sorts of bands come through and play in this little town hall, in this little seaside resort. And in my research, I found out that the Kinks played there, Fleetwood Mac played there, Cream, and their pomp, like Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce, played in this tiny little hall underneath a cliff, and at the top of the cliff is a convent.
Oh my God.
With a girls' convent. And I find it extraordinary the idea that overlooking the sea against these rocks, you would have had Clapton and Baker and Bruce jamming through Spoonful or something like that at maximum volume with Marshall Stacks at the bottom of a cliff from a convent, and the fact that this actually happened, it still really confounds me.
That's amazing, yeah.
And there's a recording somewhere I've heard of when Fleetwood Mac. There's traditionally in Northern Ireland, a band always had to play the national anthem at the end of the night. Problem was, if it was a Protestant area, you were expected to play God Save the Queen, the British national anthem. If it was a Catholic area, you're expected to play the Irish national anthem, the Soldier Song. So that was always a challenge for any band that wasn't quite sure where they were. Right. But there's a recording of Fleetwood Mac playing God Save the Queen. They obviously really don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So they play the most terrible piss take version of God Save the Queen, and there's a recording on. You can find them doing it in this little hall in this tiny little seaside town in Northern Ireland.
That's incredible.
But
Well, that's a fun tidbit. Okay, so this book obviously is unrelated to others. You've written series, you've written the short story collection that just came out recently. Are you going to write another series? What are you working on now? Let's talk about the future, Stuart.
I've gotten to the point where I think I'm going to try, and as far as publishers will allow me, I'm going to just write what I want to write. I think whatever story is interesting to me at that time. I've in the past, I've kind of forced myself to sort of do. So I've never been a big series reader.
Yeah.
So I don't feel inclined to write series. I think the only series I've really followed to any great extent is the John Connolly, Charlie Parker books.
You mean as a reader, like you?
As a reader, I mean, so it's not something in my readings that, again, writers being products of the reading. I've never been a series reader, so I've never felt inclined to write a series. And the thing is, all the books that are set in Northern Ireland are actually kind of interlinked. They are a series of sorts, but it's just different characters moving through the sort of persistent world, which is closer to what James Ellroy has done over the years, where Dudley Smith will show up maybe as a minor character in one book and a major character in another book, and different sort of lead characters moving in and out. Even something like a really closely knitted kind of trilogy like the American Underbelly trilogy, it's not the same characters book by book. So it's kind of the approach I've taken over the years, is to have, it's the same world, and House of Ashes is set in that same world as well, because the house is next to a village called Morganstown, which appears in the previous Serena Flanagan book. So they're all occurring in the same world, but just not the same characters coming in. And I admire writers like John Connolly and Lee Child and Mark Billingham and those writers who can come back to a character over and over again and find something fresh each time. I think that's a skill in itself, and not one that I possess. And I just simply get itchy feet. I want to move on, and I think I've never managed more than maybe 3 books with the same character. So basically, the book I'm writing now again is a standalone set in the 40s, and after that will be something different again. It'll probably be something set in Northern Ireland. It'll probably be ostensibly in the same world as the other books, but it probably won't be the same characters coming back. And I don't feel that I need to write a series for commercial reasons. I mean, there was I think there was an idea, back 10 years ago when I was getting a couple of books in, that series were where it was at, particularly detective series. And I think that maybe was the case at one time, but I think people have maybe moved on to that for some extent. But also the fact this affects more the UK market than, say, the American market, where in America you have bookstores like your own who can sustain a career for a writer, who aren't necessarily getting to the New York Times list and so on. In the UK, it's a bit different than that. Would depend really on the big supermarkets, the equivalent of Target and Walmart and so on, stocking books. And the thing is,
standalones are easier.
I'm sorry.
Standalones then are easier in that for that.
Yeah, it was the thing is on that shelf for the books you'll have Val McDermott will be there every year, Ian Rankin will be there every year, Mark Billing will be there, Lee Child, John Connolly, all those writers are with established series are taking up a good amount of real estate in those slots. So basically, unless one of them dies and frees up a space, that market for series detective fiction is quite well served already. So I don't think there's really a commercial imperative to go down that line. So it's just as easy just to write what I want to write rather than feeling I need to push a series.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely. I was just wondering, so the book in the 40s, is it also set in Northern Ireland or is it different?
No, it's set in Northern Ireland. It's set, again, not far from this fictional village of Morganstown. It's quite different from what I've written before now. It's the first book in a long time I've written that has a male protagonist, actually.
Yeah.
Something's different about it. But it's a man comes back from the front during the Second World War from 1945. and he's been injured in the field. He's lost an eye, and he's quite badly scarred and so on. And so he's discharged from the army, and he comes back to his very small home village, a little mill village in the wilds of Northern Ireland, and comes back to find what was always quite a religious community has become very fervently religious. That a preacher has come in and taken over the gospel hall, and has kind of entranced everybody. Everybody's very kind of enthralled to him, and he's laid down a lot of rules about community. You're either with us or you're against us, kind of thing. And our protagonist, James Latimer, comes back from the front and basically finds the village that he knew is no longer there. It's now this very locked, very enclosed, insular religious community. And his arrival begins to disrupt that and sets him on a collision course with this preacher. So that's
sounds great.
So
sounds great.
I have to finish writing that damn thing.
Okay, well, I'm not going to dwell too much on writing process because we've already talked a couple times during the pandemic and we've exhausted all of that. But I'm going to ask you a couple questions. One, do you have a particular beverage or music that you put on for writing?
Well, speaking of beverages, I should point out to people watching, it's 7 in the evening, 7:30 in the evening here, so I'm allowed to have a beer.
You are. Slancha.
No, a glass of water or a cup of tea will be as strong as it gets when I'm actually writing. Music? Did you ask me about music?
I did. Can you listen to music while you write?
I can, and I listen to all sorts of music. I know a lot of writers will use film scores and things and instrumental music because they want to have lyrics, but lyrics never bother me when I'm writing. And unfortunately, I can't do it at the minute. It used to be I would go to my local library, to their study room, and write. And I'd get one of the tables and sit with headphones on and kind of form a little bubble around myself, and I was able to focus really well to write. Obviously, with the pandemic, the libraries aren't doing that at the minute, so I have to write at home, but I still have music playing, and it could be anything from sort of classic rock to jazz to blues to it's generally quite old, it's generally quite crusty, and the sort of thing you'd expect a man with a big beard to be listening to.
All right, fair enough. I can't read or work or anything with music with lyrics, and even if I listen to orchestral music because of my violin background, even that sometimes I'll find myself engaging with the music and the melody that I'm familiar with. And then I've lost, I have read for 3 pages and have no idea what I've read. So I am a very need quiet, or it needs to be something I'm very unfamiliar with worker. But I totally respect that you can listen to lyrics and write. That's amazing to my brain. So if you are having a writing block day, what do you do? How do you get past it?
I know I'm a terribly undisciplined writer, I'm afraid, particularly when I'm writing at home. So if I'm struggling, I'll tend to just sit and stare into space or grab a guitar and something like that. I'll be honest, it's been difficult over lockdown to write in general because the kids started back at school at the start of this month, but for a large part of last year we were homeschooling. Because my wife, we had 2 different lockdowns, each lasting several months. But the first one, my wife, her library that she's the manager of, closed, so she was home. She did most of the homeschooling, so I was able to work. That's how I finished this book and The Traveller. But in the second lockdown, they kept the library open. So I had to do the homeschooling. And to be honest, if you sat with an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old all day, going over grammar and phonics and maths, I finished school a long time ago. I shouldn't have to do maths anymore. And yet now I find myself having to remember how to do long division and things like this. So by the time I got to the end of the day, my brain wasn't in a place where I felt I could actually produce anything worthwhile. It was too tired, too much of a mush. And but also just the peace and quiet of having the kids in the house and so on. It wasn't conducive. So really there was no way around that, all in just grabbing a few minutes here and there, or late at night trying to get some writing done. It's as things are now, I'm starting to get more of a routine established, and I'll try and sit down in the morning and just very often the big problem is just getting the ball rolling, getting the wheels turning. And once you get some momentum, you can keep going. And it's just getting that bit of momentum in the first place. And to be honest, I'm only managing really a few hundred words a day, whereas if I'd been able to go to the library, might have written a few thousand. But it's a job, and I have to just get on with it.
Yeah, sure. Are you thinking that you're going to be able to get back to the library anytime soon? I mean, it must be hard to have a routine, and then not only is that routine or that setting where you write gone, but then you have complete chaos in the house. Like, so you think that you're going to get back to any sort of normalcy soon? Is the library going to open up for you again?
Well, I think they might have actually already opened up. The problem is we're like a lot of places, like in the States, where we're really being hit hard by the pandemic at the minute.
Yeah.
So you're better off staying home. Basically, yeah, the cases are very high at the minute. The infection rate and the death rate is quite high in Northern Ireland. So yeah, basically just still keeping my head down. It's just like everywhere, really. I mean, I know the States things are much more different by state and area by area.
I think we have 300 ICU beds available right now in Texas, like in the whole state of Texas. So I don't go anywhere either unless it's for work. So we're all in a state, really. Okay, so if you get to have dinner with 3 literary characters, past or present, you can also convert this to authors if it's easier. So either characters or authors, you put together a dinner party, invite 3 people, live or dead. Who would you want at your dinner party?
I'll stick with characters, maybe.
Okay.
And I'm going to be a bit twisted about this. One of them would have to be Hannibal Lecter for talking about a dinner party, wouldn't it?
Okay. You'd have
I want to make sure I check his ingredients if he's cooking. I'd want to be just double check that first of all.
Exactly.
No fava beans whatsoever.
Exactly.
But Hannibal Lecter, but also maybe Mary Cat from We've Always Lived in the Castle.
Oh yeah.
I think we're getting 3 killers.
You are. Maybe. I mean, you are taking your life with this dinner party.
Maybe Ripley as well.
Ooh, good.
And then I think I just go and lock the door and keep myself out of the way.
You would be surprised how many people I've had several people say Patricia Highsmith. So you choosing Ripley is quite appropriate. But all right, excellent. Do you have a word or phrase that you overuse in your writing?
Ooh, a lot of us struggle with nods and shrugs. My characters tend to do a lot of inhaling and exhaling. Which I'm conscious of it now, and I try not to do it too much. But I'm not one of those writers. I don't like these very kind of prescriptive rules that sometimes people have, like you're not allowed to use adverbs, you're not allowed to say very, you're not allowed to start with the weather, that kind of thing. I don't like those kind of rules at all. I think you write what needs to be written, and it doesn't matter whether it fits anybody's sort of checklist of things you can and can't do. But I do find I have to go back and make sure that that people haven't nodded too much or shrugged too much or inhaled or exhaled, or their heart hasn't hammered in their chest too much. That sort of thing. Sometimes things are just a bit too easy to fall back on. You have to watch out for. But I have no hard and fast rules in that. If somebody's heart needs to hammer in their chest, it will hammer in their chest.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I was already planning on talking to you about this, but someone has written in the comments that their husband wants to hear about your guitar collection. So I want you to talk about your guitar collection. I also want to talk to you about the fact that you are in lockdown, in the pandemic. You have taken up the hobby of making guitars, which is incredible. So let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the guitar, and the guitar's my own background. You want to talk about the ones that I have, or the ones that I built?
Sure. Sure.
My pride and joy. If there's a guitar collector out there, my pride and joy is
So beautiful.
my
Beautiful.
59 Ricci Les
Yeah.
Paul. And I also have very nice ES 335 reissue.
Wow.
And I've got a few. You'll notice the Van Halen t-shirts, so
Yep.
I'll have to have one of these.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
And there's a 5150 up there as well.
I was about to say, there's the, yeah, I see that.
You've disappeared, McKenna. I don't know if people can still hear me. I'll talk as if you can. Also with building guitars, you can see. Did I disappear there, or did you disappear?
You froze for just a second, but we could hear you and everything is fine.
Oh, okay, that's all right. I've been building a few guitars. I had always repaired and tinkered and maintained guitars out of necessity, and I worked in a music store through most of the 90s and would repair people's guitars that came in and had to kind of learn on my feet. So I've always done that, and with lockdown, I started building guitars, and I showed McKenna this before we started. It started kind of last year, just for fun. I decided to build a guitar with my son, who was 7 at the time, and he actually did most of the work. I did very little other than just help him out with it, and I'm immensely proud that I sent a picture of the guitar to Guitarist magazine in the UK, and they put a picture of him in it.
But it's just, I mean, yes, I saw that ahead of time, but it's still just like, it's too cool. He must have been over the moon.
He wasn't really phased by it. His parents and his grandparents were all absolutely thrilled, but he was kind of.
That's probably more appropriate, right? Yeah.
But that kind of lit a fuse, and I started building more. And this is my favorite one I built is this. It's a copy of a Charvel Star from the early 80s.
So pretty.
That I built and hand finished and so on. And I've been cataloging them online on Instagram and so on. You'll tend to get more guitar stuff on Instagram from me rather than on Twitter or Facebook. I'm rebuilding my Charvel guitar that I got in the 80s at the minute, and I got plans to build another couple. But we'll see what I've been working from. I'm not going to show everybody the mess, but I have a workbench over there in the corner of my office, which has served me quite well up to now, but I've kind of outgrown it now, and I'm going to try and get my garage cleared out completely so I can put in like a bandsaw and a spindle sander and so on, so I can actually start getting just lumps of wood rather than having to get them pre-cut and start building guitars from scratch, which is my ambition. But that'll be between getting the next book written, obviously.
Yes, as long as it doesn't interfere with your writing, I'm on board. All right. Well, that I think we have a quiet audience. I don't have any other questions for you. I think we've done it. I will mention again that we have signed book plates available for House of Ashes, which is highly recommended by Murder by the Book staff.
I'm sorry, McKenna, I've lost you again.
All right. Are you back? Hello. Am I back? Am I back? Can you see me?
You're back. Yeah, I can see you now. Sorry.
Okay. All right. We do actually have another question that just popped up. What happened to the movie option of Ghost of Belfast, the one with the screenplay by Craig Ferguson with Pierce Brosnan as Jerry?
As far as I know, they just couldn't finance it. I think it just came down to not being able to raise the money. Craig kept the option on it for, I think, almost 5 years. It ran for quite a while. I paid my mortgage for about 5 years, to be honest. And it was a shame. I never saw the script that he wrote. I would have liked to have seen it, but I never got to see it. And I think he could have made a very good job of it. But it's just, I think the money wasn't there. I do sometimes wonder if they came back to it now that sort of Netflix and some of these venues for movies now that didn't exist 10 years ago, and where they can take more chances with the style of the movie, they might have more chance of financing it. But I think that moment has passed. And there have been other people kind of sniffing around and so on, but nothing has actually come to fruition. And we've had We've had other close shaves. I mean, Ratlines was in development for a TV series and actually got quite far along, to the point of the full. It was an 8-episode run, I think. Scripts are done and distribution was in place. Fine money was in place and so on. And then the last minute, just the broadcaster involved just backed out. We've the first Heel and Back book Here and Gone. There's a pretty good script for that was written. That I got to see. But the problem is, one of the first times I met James Ellroy, his words of wisdom to me were, when you sell your movie rights, cash a check, forget about it.
Yeah.
For every, I don't know, maybe 100 books that get option 1 might stand a slim chance of actually getting made.
Sure.
And some books can take years and years to get there. The movie Limitless had Bradley Cooper, and it was based on a book called The Dark Fields by an Irish author called Alan Glynn. And I think it was in something like 10 years it was being passed out from studio to studio before they finally got everything together and got it made. So it's not something, I think, if you, as an author, you can't really give that much headspace to the idea of film adaptations or TV adaptations, because the chances are so slim of anything getting done, even if it's optioned, until you're actually sitting at the premiere watching it on screen. You've no guarantee of anything at all. Yeah. It's not something I concern myself with too much.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm going to wrap up this event. You have a wonderful evening. As I mentioned, we have signed book plates for House of Ashes. The link is in the comments. Stuart, as always, big fans here in Houston. Can't wait for anything that you write. And all best to you this evening. Enjoy your beer and your guitars, and have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your support. And I can't wait to get back to see you in person.
You're always welcome. It'll be a good day when you're back in store.
So.
Bye.
Bye.